Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. I'm going to get another big Ponderosa pine on the mill. This one's a pretty big log. So in this episode of the old Jarhead Sawdust Roadshow, we're going to knock this big Ponderosa pine down into 1x6s. It's going to be fun, and I promise you, I'm not going to make any mistakes milling this one up. I know my last few videos, I was just making mistakes left and right, and you know, I guess the point in all of that is, hey, it happens. It's real. When you run one of these mills, some things just don't go the way as planned, or you forget things, or you just make mistakes. So I'm going to get this log positioned on the deck, and as always, you know, I swing out bunks in. It really helps to measure the pith, though sometimes I just measure off the frame somewhere. As long as you measure the same place on both ends, it's going to work out fine. You want to make sure that the pith is centered as well as it can be on the log, so that when you're milling really level with the pith. The mill doesn't have to be level, but you want the pith level on the deck. So we're going to go ahead and get this one knocked down. We start with taking cap cuts off and then some flitch cuts. And once we get the open face to a width that's going to work for whatever it is you're making, you know, these flitch cuts here, they're over 6 inches, and that's okay. We want to go ahead and take them down to something that we can later edge to 6 inches. But you notice there, I pulled out my knife and I was digging away at something. I didn't like the way the band was cutting, and I thought maybe I ran into something. I didn't, but we're going to go ahead, swap the band out anyway. It's kind of one of those things that I find is, you know, caution is the better side of valor, right? Pull the band off, put a new one on. And I prefer 7-degree bands. Now, there's been a lot of questions on social media platforms about what bands to use for this or that. And Woodmizer will tell you that a 10-degree band is what they call their utility grade band. It's kind of a catch-all. It can do anything, but it isn't really the best for all types of wood. And while it does fine on softwoods, when you start getting into these big wide cuts, I don't find that the 10 degrees cut that well. Now, the 10-degree bimetals actually do better than the double hards, and I like to use those on big knots or dry wood, that kind of thing. But honestly, I prefer 7-degree bands, and I have standard 7s. I've got a few turbo 739s. I've got some 747s. Actually, the most of the 7s I have are the 747s, and they move a lot of sawdust, which is actually kind of a good thing, except when the wind is blowing directly in your face, and then it's not so great. But I also like 4-degree bands, and you know, a lot have asked about the different bands, and I will tell you that the 7 degrees are, in my opinion, probably the best profile for everything, especially the big stuff. They cut faster, they tend to cut smooth. And another thing that I will tell you is that I started out with 1.25-inch bands, the LT40 hydraulic standards. You know, they come with 1.25-inch guide wheels and bands, but you can actually run 1.5 inches. And I do find that 1.5 inches seem to last longer, and they cut flatter. All right, now I also like 4s. 4-degree bands are very good, especially on those wide cuts. But I'll tell you, when those 4-degree bands start to dull, they dull fast, so you just have to pay attention to that. All right, so we kick this 6-inch cant off the deck, and you know, this is something that I do a lot. I do find with the 26-horse motor, I can mill very, very wide, but from a speed perspective and, you know, maximum production, I actually find that it's faster to cut my cant down and mill 12 inches whenever possible. 18, it's fine, it'll do it. But if I've got a cant big enough, like this log here allowed, I'm going to cut it down, take a 6-inch cant off, kick it off on the deck. Then I'll get this side of the log milled so that I can cut it down into 2 6-inch cants and then mill them together. And it's actually going to mill faster when I do that. So I know it looks kind of weird. You don't have to do this, but I find from a production standpoint, if I mill the cant down to, in this case, 12 1/8, after kicking 6 inches off, and I split that 12 1/8 into 2 6-inch cants, then I'm going to be good to go. Now, you'll notice that we put one flitch up against the cant right there. That flitch was 12 1/8, and it was perfect. I could go ahead, set it up against this 12 1/8 inch cant, and mill that one down at the same time. So I split the cant, but you'll notice he just pulled off a 6-inch 1x, and there's a second one there that they were able to pull off. So now I got one flitch out of the way at the same time I was splitting the cant. Now, of course, I've split it. I'm going to lift it up and reposition it a little bit, but what's more important is that we get in there and clean those bunks off. You really don't want sawdust or dirt or something like that on the bunks, because it will cause some issues with how flat and level you cut. In a recent video, Dave over at The Old Man and the Saw mentioned that as well. It's actually really important when running these mills to try to keep those bunks clean whenever possible. So now we're going to knock down some 1x6s 2 at a time, and I'm going to let this run a little bit, and then I'm going to come back to you and talk a little bit more about what's going on. So stay tuned, stick around, lots more to come. All right, we get those last boards off the deck, and we're going to get that 6-inch cant that I kicked off the side back up, get it positioned, and then we'll mill that one. Now you'll notice with this one that the flitches were on the wrong side. That's okay. We just move it all over, and then it's often easier just to grab a cant hook and kind of flip that up while the log clamp helps. And, you know, it's just part of the game, folks. In this case, the flitches are on the wrong side, so the help just goes ahead, gets them out of the way, and they were so great. They actually started pushing this cant in for me before I could get the log clamp behind it. That's great. It's just going to help things go faster. Now we're going to knock this one down, and I'm going to knock this down to below 6 inches so that we can then put those flitches back up on the deck, mill them to 6 inches, and move on. One of the things you're going to notice when I mill those flitches is that I don't totally edge everything. It might seem a little counterintuitive, but the reality is that when you're milling for production, sometimes you just know that you're not going to get, you know, say 2 1x6s out of every flitch. That's all right. You take the best that you can out of them. If there's some that are going to be a little bit small, it's really not worth the time, especially when you think about it, whether you're charging by the board foot or charging by the hour. It just makes more sense to edge them to what the customer wants. But if you've got some that are a bit small, maybe they're only about 5 inches with some wane on them, you could edge those into 1x4s, but a lot of the time the customer doesn't really see value in that, and they're paying for it. So you could see right there, I had some wane on some of those. We're just going to leave them. He can either use it for firewood, or he can edge them on a table saw. I think he was just going to use it for firewood. You know, it makes good kindling. So now we get those off the deck, get this cant flipped over, and you notice I do that quite a bit. There wasn't really a lot of stress in this log. There was a little bit, but not a lot. But it still helps sometimes just to flip that cant 180 degrees, just to make sure that if you're starting to get a little cant pop, you can flip it the other way, take some off the top, and if it stays flat, keep on going like I did in this case. So anyway, folks, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Y'all have a great day. The Old Jarhead out.
Yeehaw!
I think we'll take a break.